Hello writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, the day where I give you my tips and advice on the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. Today's question comes to us from patron and future Legacy Books author E.L. Drayton, who asks, how do you determine what extra information and what world-building information to give your audience? So this question was posed specifically in relation to the addenda that I put in my book volumes. So the volumes of Underrealm are these big tomes that are actually comprised of 3 individual novels all stuck together, and then at the back I've got these things called the addenda, which is basically just extra information and world building stuff about everything that went into the creation of the books. And then they're organized by category. Like addendum A is usually, but will not always be, historical essays about the world of Underrealm. Now I'm far from the first author to do this, and I very much doubt that I'm the best at it, but still the question remains, how do I choose what goes in those addenda? Do I decide at the end when I'm putting the whole volume together after I've written everything, or do I make choices as I'm going through the book? How do you choose what to share with your audience to let them behind the curtain and see the behind the scenes of your world? Well, my answer to this actually relates very heavily to the world building that you do for your world in the first place. I've talked about this before, but basically world building goes as far as it needs to go in order for you to tell your story. You can build and build and build your society and your culture and your fashion and your agriculture and all of these things, but at some point you really just need what's going to go in your story. Now, of course, that's kind of an impossible standard to adhere to, at least for me. No matter how stringent I try to be about what world building I do, there's always extra. There's always some avenue that I go down that's not really hyper important to the narrative, but that I just find super interesting. But when you're choosing what behind the scenes stuff to share with your audience, you should be keeping in mind that they are going to be most interested in the things that have the most to do with your story. In the case of the Nightblade epic, it's a story about a girl who's going out into the wide world, and she is seeing things and learning a lot more about the world's history than she's ever known before. So what's interesting and pertinent to that story? Well, the history of the world, how things came to be, and specifically how things came to be that she sees directly. It might be very interesting to learn the history of the kingdom of Kalentin, which is the northwesternmost kingdom in Underrealm, but Lauren's never been there, and she's only met one person from there, so do the readers really care? Now, in the future, Lauren or some other characters might go to Kalentin, and at that point, when I'm publishing that volume and creating addenda for that book, yeah, of course they're going to hear about the history of Kalentin and the creatures who live there and the culture and the people. But that's the thing, at this exact moment in time, it just doesn't make sense for me to talk about it. Now, in the first volume of the Nightblade epic, volume 1, which is books 1, 2, and 3, the addenda starts off with the history of Underrealm from the very beginning. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it called Underrealm? All these questions are answered in the very first addenda in the first book. Well, that might not be particularly relevant to Lauren's specific story, but if you think about it on a thematic level, it's very appropriate. Where did this Underrealm come from? This is the first book that's existed in this universe that I'm building. What's the deal? What premise are we starting off this whole adventure from? And then again, in the second volume, the first essay is about the elves for 2 reasons. 1, in the second volume, you meet elves for the first time, and 2, you've been hearing about them a lot before that, and you don't really know what's going on, and when they do appear, it's super weird. It's very mysterious, and you kind of end the scene going, what the hell was that? And so the addenda attempts to answer what the hell that was. And then there's a bunch of other little stuff that you can stick in that may not, I don't know, expose more of your world or really highlight certain thematic elements that you were going for, but that will please certain segments of your readers, and you know that because you are a fan of the genre that you are writing in. For me, legit, one of my favorite things in the entirety of all of Tolkien's work is his calendar, his timeline of events that happen over the course of The Lord of the Rings. Because that timeline starts before the book starts, and then it goes through the entirety of the book, and it talks about things that happened at the same time as the events in the book, but which are not depicted in the book, and then it carries on after the book to the literal end of the Fellowship and when everybody eventually passes away years after the events of the book and everything, and just, oh, my heart, my soul, my emotions. And so that goes in the addenda of each volume. There is a timeline of the events in that volume, and they do discuss things that are going on outside of the story that are going to be very relevant to the story in the future. If you've never gone looking through the timelines for Easter eggs, I highly recommend that you do so. Basically, any time that something is mentioned in the timeline where you're like, what the hell is that? I don't remember that happening, or that didn't seem very important. It's very important. So these are the things that you want to share with your readers when you're letting them look behind the curtain and see what went into the creation of the book. What is important to the story? What was important to you when you were coming up with the narrative and the challenges that your hero or heroes or whatever are going to face? And then what, if you were reading somebody else's book in your genre, what would you want to know about? What would you want to see? What sort of thing do you really love as an extra? And then just sort of toss that in there. Thank you, Erica, so much for the question. This was a fun one to answer, and I hope that you found it helpful. A reminder to everybody else watching this video that my $5 patrons on Patreon, like Erica, get these videos 2 weeks in advance, and they are also the only people who are allowed to request topics for me to cover. So if that sounds interesting to you, check out my Patreon link right over there. You can also check out my Last Writer Wednesday video right up there. Thank you so much for watching. Keep on writing, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!